Evangelistic disciple making. This one is a big one. This goes back to something we talked about at the beginning, but the idea that we've got to make sure that we connect evangelism as part of the discipleship process. We've got to do a better job of making evangelism and discipleship two sides of the same coin. In fact, I've sort of taken, and I've got to be careful, for a while I almost eliminated evangelism from my vocabulary. I don't think I ever eliminated it from my practice, but my goal was to move towards disciple-making language, right? We make disciples who grow as disciples. Now the danger was I found that when I did that, people ended up not evangelizing. And in fact, this has sort of become a big area of concern for me. Some of you will know that Ed and I, over the past year, have taken on leadership at the Billy Graham Center at Wheaton College, and we're trying to help recapture a commitment to biblical evangelism, proclamation evangelism, but I'll tell you, it's astonishing to me how nobody wants to talk about evangelism right now. Nobody wants to talk about evangelism. This is not a theological issue. Well, those in that theological camp like it, and those who are in that don't. That's not the case. Nobody wants to talk about evangelism. It's unbelievably difficult to get people. Everybody says they care about it. Nobody actually seems to want to do anything about it. So we've got to recapture, and this is one of the things that Steve Merle, the pastor from Manila, said. He said, disciple making is following Jesus, fishing for people. Doing that in conjunction with others. Discipleship is simply helping someone find and follow Jesus. This is such a key element, and I see some people taking pictures. We're going to give this PowerPoint to John, aren't you? And you're going to make it available afterwards. So everybody's going to have a copy of this one if you want it when we're done. Understanding discipleship as the very first step in the process of evangelizing, I think, is going to be a key to helping people not only become converted, but become fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ. So how are you helping equip your church to evangelize others so that they might not only know and believe in Jesus, but they might eventually become like him? At our church, the church where I'm on, a member in the Nashville area, I'm on staff as a pastor. I'm a volunteer pastor. I don't get paid, but they asked me to serve as a pastor, and I love doing that. The senior pastor is one of my best friends. He and I get together regularly, and we plan and strategize for the future. And one of the things we realized recently is our church needed a greater emphasis on proclamation evangelism, personal evangelism. We needed to not just talk about it, we needed to train our people. So we're actually halfway through a series right now. We'll be preaching again this Sunday, and I'll be leading the church in a prayer time for evangelism. We've got everybody in the church is praying for a specific group of 4 people, and we're actually, as part of our sermon, we're training them on how to share their faith, and we're giving them resources to do that. Even tracts, believe it or not. We've got this pretty cool contemporary young church, and we're giving them paper tracts and telling them to go out and take the tracts out and share them with their neighbors. We want desperately that we help our people to know how to simply lead people to Jesus, and then know about how to then walk them through the process of becoming like Christ. But we've had, and those of us who are in discipleship ministries will have to admit that we've thought of ourselves in many ways as those that come along after they've become a follower of Jesus. We've got to jettison that idea. And we've got to merge our ministries with evangelism and missions to such a degree that we're working in concert as a singular unified effort, not thinking of ourselves as separate and distinct ministries within the church. Others-focused disciple making. Now this is an intriguing one to me. Robertson McQuilkin, many of you will know that name, such a powerful follower of Christ, the interview, I wish I could give you his entire interview. It was rich, it was so good. But he said this, he said, if I'm going to companion with God, I'm going to concentrate on his fulfillment, not mine, his joy as I spend time with him. Many of you will remember the great Dietrich Bonhoeffer quote when Bonhoeffer said, when Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die, right? We know that quote. I was speaking with a friend once who's a good friend and a man that I admire greatly, pastor of a very large church, and I remember him saying to me, he said, Micah, if I said that to people as I shared with them the gospel, nobody would ever believe the gospel. And I remember just sort of curling up inside. In fact, I didn't respond very well to him, and I had to apologize later in the moment. Sometimes I can get hot-headed. We've got to recapture an evangelistic and discipleship model that calls people to die. And we've been scared to do that. We've been scared to say to them, Luke chapter 9:23, if anyone wants to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. We framed discipleship for a long time as here's how to be the best version of you. And that's tragic, and it's anti-gospel. We've got to call people to abandon themselves and understand that what discipleship does is not help us to think less of ourselves, but to think of ourselves less. to constantly be an internally focused people. As a pastor, as a senior, I was a senior pastor for 10 years. I've been a pastor now for almost 20 years. And every time not every time I preach, but regularly when I preach, I say to our people, Christians and churches are like cars out of alignment, right? What happens if you don't get your car fixed? If it has an alignment issue and you don't get it fixed and you let go of the steering wheel, what's going to happen to the car? It's going to turn inward, which is exactly what Christians do by nature. Churches and Christians will by nature constantly turn inward. Now, if you don't go take it to the mechanic and get it fixed, and you're trying to drive that car down the road, how do you drive a straight line? You have to overcorrect, right? You can't just correct to the middle. You have to overcorrect to get the car to drive straight. I'm convinced we have to overcorrect towards missions and evangelism in our churches. We have to talk about it almost more than we think we should. Because by nature, we're fighting against a natural inertia as people constantly turn back towards themselves. Again, I've been a pastor for almost 20 years. I've literally never, ever had a church member come to me and say, "Preacher, we're just far too worried about ourselves. We need to worry about those folks out there a little bit more." But I can't count the number of times I've had somebody come to me, and they always couch it in biblical language. But in essence, this is what they're saying. "Preacher, we're far too worried about those folks. We need to worry about ourselves." And they'll say things like this: "Pastor, I think we need to be focused more on discipleship. I think we need to be focused more on loving each other. I think we need to be focused more on pastoring each other and caring for the body." Well, those are hard to argue against. But you got to understand what they're actually saying underneath all that. What they're doing is what they're by nature inclined to do, and that is turn back toward themselves. We've got to have a discipleship model. We've got to say to that person, "You're right. We do need to recapture a greater commitment to discipleship in our church." And discipleship calls you to abandon self and care passionately about God and others. So we've got to have an externally focused discipleship model. All right.